This programme was made with the support of the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland.
Aiden, the patron saint of England, who never was.
Well, I think Aiden is Ireland's best kept secret, and his time has come.
We are incredibly grateful that he got from Ireland to Scotland and from Scotland to here.
So he came over and he started a monastery here.
Aiden chose Lindisfarne.
The English-speaking peoples throughout the world owe a tremendous amount to the mission that was based here at Lindisfarne.
He just understood people and wanted to share God with them.
He would not ride anywhere, he always walked, so that he was always among the people.
Aiden is the person for people who want to live without the ego.
A man who did something so very special.
Aiden is a much more important figure than he's often credited with being.
Here we are, over 1,000 years later, and we're still talking about Aiden.
Aiden was the Apostle of England.
I'm Paul Wright and welcome to the 8th programme of Back from the Brink, the series which investigates the role of the early medieval Irish in helping to save Western civilization. In our last programme, we heard how the Irish monk Aiden, through 16 years of missionary work among the Anglo-Saxons of Northumbria, helped to transform northern England from a pagan warrior-based society into a more Christian literate one, from the year 635 AD onwards. Now we're at the point in Aiden's story where the brother of Aiden's original patron, King Oswald, has just killed Aiden's friend, a fact which greatly angered Aiden. Lindisfarne local historian Andy Rain.
Oswy, who was Oswald's brother, had killed Oswin, his cousin, in the hopes of getting the two halves of the kingdom rather than just the northern half of Northumbria, which was the kingdom of Bernicia. And this really distressed Aiden, and we're told that he was down at Bamborough, and there he was outside the little chapel there in Bamborough, and what he appears to have been doing was fasting against the king. So he would have been fasting as a sort of protest. It was kind of like, what you've done is wrong. And while Aiden was there doing this is the point at which he dies.
When Aiden died, we know that he died sitting, leaning up against a beam of the wall of the little church in Bamborough, looking out towards his beloved island of Lindisfarne, that holy island.
Saint Aiden enthusiast Graham Booth of the modern community of Aiden and Hilda, based on Holy Island Lindisfarne in Northumberland.
He was a human being. 16 years is not long. He's given his all, he's given his life for it, and he would have been very disappointed in what had just happened in Bamborough and in the leadership of the Kingdom of Northumbria. And he must have wondered whether this stuff's going to fall apart. Is this mission going to really come to anything? Is it going to last? Well, we know, of course, that it did. We know that it grew. Therefore, we know something about the quality of the foundations that he laid. And I think that ethos of love and grace spread out like a tidal wave. I also think the very clever way in which he involved the local people through the school and teaching these boys the way of life meant that there was an ongoing pattern of waves that would go out from Lindisfarne. So he must have wondered if he was at all human, whether it was going to survive. But it more than survived. It triumphed.
When Aiden walked the English shore to windy Lindisfarne, where the morning sun first hit the land, he was the inspiration. Selfless love, the message His song was loud and clear. He died in 651, his truth for all to hear. To hold the hand that's offered, he took the Lord's strong arm, the Apostle of Northumbria, first Bishop of Lindisfarne. To hold the hand that's offered, he took the Lord's strong arm, the Apostle of Northumbria, first Bishop of Lindisfarne, first Bishop of Lindisfarne.
And so Aiden, first Bishop of Lindisfarne, died and went to his Maker in the year 651 AD. So what was the ultimate effect of his 16 years of hardcore missionary work among the Anglo-Saxons? Lindisfarne-based early medieval historian Kate Tristram.
Well, the impression that we get is that the result of his life was that Christianity was planted here, planted in the soil, in such a way that it didn't afterwards ever depart from altogether, although there were, of course, ups and downs in the life of the Christian Church. I gather that he was a much loved man. For example, this is the way I interpret one of the little stories told about what happened after his death. It is said that when Aiden died, and he appears to have had either a stroke or a heart attack, something of that kind, something that felled him but didn't kill him immediately. But it's said that he was leaning against the outside wall of his little wooden church at Bamborough. And after his death, as often happened in those days with candles and things, that little wooden church burned down. But the beam against which Aiden had been leaning wouldn't burn. So they built up the church again in wood, and the same thing happened. That particular beam refused to burn when the rest of the church went up in flames. So the next time they built a church there, they put that beam of wood as a kind of freestanding pillar inside the church, and people used to go and pray alongside it. Now, this is the kind of story where really you wonder whether the people are using the story form to say something that maybe we would say in a more abstract kind of way. I think what they were trying to say in that story was, Aiden has gone. He's gone to heaven, of course. Aiden has gone, but his work continues. The beam that wouldn't burn stands for Aiden's work, and you couldn't destroy it. It continued.
It began to establish the seed of an idea that there's something of God in every human being.
Ray Simpson, historian and also founder of the modern-day community of Aiden and Hilda, based in Lindisfarne.
And treating each person as a child of God who had something of God in them, that began to civilize the Anglo-Saxons. And it enabled the English to become far more good people than they previously were. It brought in education. It brought in calligraphy and illumination of manuscripts and art, which led to wonderful things like the Lindisfarne Gospels. It brought in these networks, villages of God. It brought in a sense, the liberation of women, in the sense that women were allowed to take leadership, and that women as well as men were brought up in the faith and could be used as mentors. I think also, in a larger sense, before the Irish mission came to the English, you had warring races in Ireland and Britain. You had at least 4 different races with 4 languages, and they all fought battles and were at enmity. You had the Irish and the Irish Scots. You had the Picts in the north of Scotland, as it now is. You had the original Britons, the Celtic Britons, and you had the Anglo-Saxons, the English. all fighting each other. As a result of the Irish mission and Oswald's work, friendships and alliances were built between these warring groups. The fellowship of the gospel became something stronger than their differences, and you began to have a vision of these islands being places of saints and scholars rather than places of barbaric warriors.
You had a stronghold here of warriors who lived by the sword, and to change a whole mindset and then produce a society which was as forgiving and as intellectual as it was, and as faith-driven as it was, to the point where people could travel freely, was a huge, huge plus.
Northumberland local historian Andrew Lobb. And here's Andy Rain to once again share his views.
We're told that in Oswald's day, a woman with a child, with a baby, or a pregnant woman, I think a woman with a baby in arms, I think it says, would have been able to walk from one end of the kingdom to the other without any fear of being molested. That was an actual thing that was said of the fruit of the peaceful kingdom.
Talk about the golden age of Northumbria, you have a greater learning. This place became a centre of learning throughout Europe and recognised as such, almost epitomised in the Lindisfarne Gospels by Eadfrith, which was a tribute to Cuthbert. But everything that Cuthbert did was almost a tribute to Aiden.
Northumberland historian Andrew Lobb. Here's Graham Boot to continue the story.
The Lindisfarne Gospels themselves say something about all of this. The wonders of the creativity, the artwork, the meticulous nature of their preparation, the vast array, the vast palette of colours that were used, drawn from all over the known world. Colours coming made out of pigments from the Mediterranean, others coming from Afghanistan. You know, back in the 7th century, this is quite remarkable stuff.
But I think that all of these things, the freeing of slaves, the educating, the promotion of respect for all kinds of people, all of those things are byproducts.
Lindisfarne historian Andy Rain.
Those are things that were just an authentic outworking of the central thing. And the central thing was introducing people to a living faith in a living, loving God. And that was the legacy of Aiden to a whole people who had no Christian history whatsoever. They had no Christian memory. They had nothing that would have predisposed them other than the hunger within their own hearts and the ability to recognise something that was genuine and contagious.
And no programme on Aiden of Lindisfarne would be complete without asking why his work among the English has often been sidelined by history and very much lost in the mists of time. Historian Ray Simpson.
It's a tough question and I don't fully know the answer, but look at celebrity TV shows. They are peak ratings. But actually, people who go on them don't seem to find happiness. The popular stories liked superstar saints. And I think Aiden was a person who left Ireland before he'd made any mark in Ireland. So he wasn't known in Ireland. And in a sense, he was an ordinary person. People who come to Lindisfarne will talk about Cuthbert, who became a superstar saint here. And it was because his shrine was so big that a king of England said Lindisfarne must be known as Holy Island. It's all Cuthbert. Aiden was overshadowed.
Aiden's reputation, and therefore any kind of real understanding of what he achieved, was a bit undermined, so to speak, by the very great reputation of Cuthbert, who came next.
Historian Kate Tristram once again.
And Cuthbert had all the advantages, because Cuthbert was English, he was local, and he did, according to the stories, probably true, lots and lots of miracles. He also had lots of gifts of spiritual gifts of one kind or another, such as spiritual healing and second sight and prophecy and converse with angels.
And Lindisfarne historian Andy Rain had this pertinent comment to make.
What you do have is you have Cuthbert being made a fuss of. Now, Cuthbert was a wonderful guy, and he was somebody who was genuinely English, Anglo-Saxon. And then his body, because it didn't decay as it was being carried around, it went to lots of places. So the places where the body went, that also developed almost into a cult of Cuthbert. But then there was a time when there was a deliberate publicising of a cult of Cuthbert because he was English, in a way that Aiden, because he was Irish, probably as somebody to make a big fuss of, would not have been the man that was needed at the time. But at the time when Aiden was actually alive, he was the man who made the impact and built the kingdom of God wherever it was that he went, and he built in such a way that the seeds of it went far and wide.
I look upon Aiden as definitely a saint, but a different kind of saint. He wasn't a dramatic man, but he was a beaver kind of man. He was the sort of man who undertakes a job and beavers at it until either he's finished or the job is finished. And that, I think, is something that in our century we can very, very well appreciate.
Over the last two programmes in this series, we've investigated the remarkable life of Aiden of Lindisfarne, whose epic deeds among the Anglo-Saxons in the mid-7th century helped to transform England from a pagan warrior-based society into a more peaceful, literate and Christian one. And it's because of his work among the English that many people, such as the 19th century Bishop Lightfoot of Durham, have claimed that the Irish monk Aiden should be called the true apostle of England, and not the early medieval papal envoy Augustine of Kent. So just how valid is such a claim? Historian Andy Rain.
Absolute veracity, and if anything, the spin is in the opposite direction. I think it would be being very generous to say that Augustine was the Apostle of Kent. Even in Kent, you've got the traces of Celtic monasticism and the fingerprint of stuff coming all the way down from Northumbria. So Augustine did what he could, and perhaps he was confused by a situation that was very different from what he expected. He managed to alienate people. He managed to not get other Christians who were already here on his side. But he did something. He stayed true to his own lights, as limited as what they were. But I think Aiden it wasn't trying to replicate Rome. that he did. He wasn't trying to replicate anything. All he was doing was sharing the gospel and embracing the local people, recognising their culture, listening and relating, and we see that just becoming something that was very incarnate and genuine.
And historian Kate Tristram shares her opinion.
Well, I imagine that Bishop Lightfoot was one day writing his sermon about Aiden, and he wanted to get a sentence that everybody would remember. And so he came up with the sentence, Augustine was the apostle of Kent, but Aiden was the apostle of England. A lovely sentence, very memorable, and of course it has caused us great joy up here, because on every possible occasion when there are southerners around, we quote it at them. In terms of actual historical fact, I don't think we know enough to kind of pull their work apart, you know. Certainly a great deal was started by Augustine and a great deal by Aiden and the boys that were trained in the school here. They were missionaries not only in the north but also in the Midlands. One of them, St. Wilfrid, was looked upon as the missionary of the kingdom of Sussex, deep south, which was the last of the English kingdoms to be converted to the Christian faith. And so I wouldn't want to write a historian's thesis about it, because I think we really don't know. But I think, all the same, there is a lot to be said for the fact that Aidan was apostle. Certainly apostle of Northumbria, without any doubt. And maybe further still through the work of his boys that were trained here.
In saying that Augustine was the apostle to Kent and Aidan was the apostle to the English, but there is something to be said for that evaluation.
Lindisfarne historian Ray Simpson.
Because although Pope Gregory had wanted Augustine to reach the English as a whole, and he made one or two attempts to go beyond Kent, in fact, he never was effective outside Kent. And Aidan and the Irish mission was a mission to much the largest of the English kingdoms, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. There's no doubt about that. And there's no doubt either that the king of Northumbria became the recognised leader, first among equals, of all the English kings. And the Christian mission spread from Northumbria right down into the outskirts of London and across through to the Midlands of England. So I think there is something to be said for Bishop Lightfoot's evaluation. And when I go to America, or when American groups come to Lindisfarne, I say, do you realise the first WASPs were converted here? They think I mean white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, that's what they call them, WASPs. And I said, no, the first WASPs were white Anglo-Saxon pagans. And they were converted here, and the English-speaking peoples all throughout the world owe a tremendous amount to the mission that was based here at Lindisfarne.
This programme was made with the support of the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland. Solo songs by Cliff Wedgbury. Until our next number 9 programme in this 12-part Back from the Brink series, when we'll be investigating the epic life of Columbanus of Bangor, well, I'm going to leave you with historians Andy Rain, Andrew Lobb and Graham Boot talking about Saint Aidan's ultimate legacy. From myself, Paul Wright, bye for now.
I would say that Aidan, who was an Irish monk from Scotland, came to the English people who had invaded this land and had driven out or driven under their native Britons. He came to a people of no Celtic blood at all and brought a Celtic brand of the gospel and managed to, in bringing it to a totally different culture, sow the gospel that it was able to travel to a whole people group in one generation and become their own, enough that they could take it to other cultures without imposing their cultural stamp on the places that they went to.
I think that the Irish contribution to 6th, 7th centuries in Northumbria was huge. If it hadn't been for the influence of Aidan and his successors, we would never have had the influence to reach out into Europe. You would never have seen people like people from Wearmouth, bishops, travelling all the way to Rome. You wouldn't have seen that sort of influence throughout Europe. And these people travelled on behalf of God. And that whole message was started right here with Aidan and gradually expanded and exploded into Europe. And I think there's no doubt about it that these men carried with them a very special message. And so the contribution has to be immense.
I would say that Aidan is a much more important figure than he's often credited with being. Certainly, we are incredibly grateful that he got from Ireland to Scotland and from Scotland to here. This is multicultural mission. And, you know, Irish-speaking man learns Latin, goes up and lives in a place where he has to learn Pictish and minister amongst people there, learns English, comes down and begins by speaking with interpreters and gradually learns the language and so on. This is very adventurous stuff. And I think when we look back at the legacy of what Aidan gave to the Church of God, and indeed to wider civilization in that sense, it's huge. It's really huge.
Aidan had a completely different way of spreading Christianity.
Aidan was determined that he would do things differently.
He didn't want to keep things for himself, and he was always aware of people with more need than his.
He brought the simplicity of faith to people.
What he did led to long-lasting and extraordinary change, but he himself didn't draw the attention to himself.
Aidan realised what was necessary and did it slowly but firmly.